Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Survivor Talks with Mike. Today we will be covering Survivor 42, Episode 9. Right off the bat, I want to say that this was an intense episode that delves into topics of racial diversity. So before I start talking about it, I want everyone to know that I am a white male, and that is the approach I'll be having to this. And therefore, as much as I empathize with Marianne and Drea's position, I can't ever truly understand their lived experiences. The episode splits into two groups pretty early on, so I'll cover what happens at the start and then just go through each group individually after that. At the start of the episode, Romeo tells everyone he has no hard feelings, but that's not how he truly feels. We get a confessional where he's talking about how he doesn't trust any of them anymore. Hai knows that Romeo is who voted for him and calls him out in front of the rest of the tribe, even though Romeo continues to deny it, but Hai is correct. Romeo just wanted to create chaos and make Hai squirm by voting for him. The next day, Roxroy points out that there's more men than women and wants to keep the men strong, tries to create a all men's alliance. But Omer and Hai each say they have no interest in that. They don't want to join the misogyny club. Hai doesn't like how Roxroy plays and would like to get rid of him because he doesn't see how he can work with him going forward. At the challenge, they're split into their two groups of 5. So I'll start with the orange team, which is built up of Romeo, Hai, Roxroy, Omer, and Mike. So Roxroy got his alliance of 5 men right there, and he already has to take one out. Hai wins immunity, but loses food for the team, meaning that they go to tribal council first. It looks at the onset to be an easy vote out for Romeo, and we get a confessional from Mike talking about that. And Roxroy just assumes that all the guys are solid, that's the plan going forward, and no need to discuss it. But Omer doesn't want somebody that he feels he can't mold, so he tries to get Romeo and Hai to work together against Roxroy. Hai is willing to do it, but he wants Mike in on it. He doesn't want to go against Mike, so he goes to talk to him, and Mike is worried about how voting out Roxroy will make them look. He's not concerned about voting out Roxroy. He's okay with doing it, but he doesn't want it to look like they are willing to betray an alliance that quickly. Roxroy feels very confident at tribal council, but is then surprised to be voted out 4-1, meaning that Mike and Hai did end up agreeing to vote him out. Roxroy, my thoughts on him are he was a weird fit in this season since he played like he was from a very early season, just so concerned about like the shelter and getting food and like not the actual gameplay side of things. And he wasn't very social either. And he ends up providing a lot to the season though because of that. And this episode would never happen the way it did if it weren't for him being there. Even if there was never any chance of him winning this season. So now we'll move on to the blue team, which was Lindsay, Drea, Marianne, Jonathan, and Tori. Jonathan wins the immunity and also the kebabs for their team. Lindsay feels good about having the numbers with old Taku members, with her, Marianne, and Jonathan all there. Jonathan wants to make a move against Drea, but he uses Marianne as a decoy vote when Tori is a much clearer decoy vote in there already. And I fail to understand how he didn't think of this. He ends up being very stubborn and hard to work with. Like he goes and talks to Marianne first about wanting to vote out Drea, but using her as the decoy. And then he goes and talks to Tori. She's all excited that it's not going to be her. And then he goes and talks to Drea to tell her that Marianne is who they'll be putting the votes on as the decoy. And then he finally goes and talks to Lindsay, and Lindsay kind of sets him straight, saying, like, that's kind of dumb if she uses her idol, then Marianne's out instead of Tori. Um, and he seems completely mind blown that that was a possibility. Like, I fail to understand how he didn't uh, see that coming. Uh, they come to tribal council and see that Roxroy was voted out, which blows their mind because they had it figured that Romeo was the easy vote out there. This makes Drea reconsider her entire approach to the game. This then breaks into a discussion about representation, and that now that two black players in a row have been voted out, both Drea and Marianne don't want to see another one voted out in a row. And there's been a precedent for this happening in Survivor over the last few seasons. And before that, they didn't have the diversity program, so it didn't. They didn't really have the numbers for black players to be voted out back to back that often. But you can also see in past seasons that black players tend to get voted out a lot earlier. And I think 13 out of 42 seasons, a black player or a person of color has been voted out first, which is kind of crazy if you look at it proportionately. Jonathan then gets very defensive over this and ends up calling Drea aggressive, which is a very bad look for him. He needs to understand that this isn't them saying that he's racist if he votes for them, but it's about the representation on TV. They want to have the black players shown to be just as capable in this reality show, and they don't want their numbers to dwindle so quickly. It isn't anything to do with being racist if you vote for them. Uh, Marianne says that she has to play her idol now because otherwise people would say that she played the race card to get through, which is kind of unfortunate for her because she wasn't likely to get voted out this episode, and now she just has to play her idol out of peer pressure from viewers, essentially. They now have to return to the game, which feels kind of weird. So Jeff just lets them talk it out instead of going up and voting, which I don't know if that was the right call to do that. And it kind of shows a disconnect in between what they seem to want the show to be and what they end up actually doing with the show. Lately, they've been pushing more and more towards Survivor being a game show and less of a social experiment. And this just is like the opposite. It's kind of saying like, oh, right, the game show aspect of this kind of pulls away from this social moment, which is what they seem to really want. So it's interesting. I'd like to see if that has an effect on like Jeff and CBS going forward to uh, want to change the show back to its roots a little bit, which I would really appreciate because I much prefer when the game is more about the social aspects than about some luck and different twists. So the discussion becomes clear that Tori is going to be the one voted out since it's in between her and Lindsay, with both Drea and Marianne playing their idols. And so Tori gets up and goes and plays her shot in the dark, which is another thing where, had they not been forced to, if they had just normally voted, she might not have played her shot in the dark. But because they were talking it out, she knew the votes were going to be coming on to her, uh, which might not have happened otherwise. So she gets a little bit lucky with that. And I thought it was very interesting that because if they do have a 2 and 12 shot at it now, both her and Lindsay could have gone and played their shot in the dark and successfully hit on it, and then everyone would have been safe, which would have left them with no one to vote out, which I would have loved to see, but I don't know what they would have done. Maybe they would have called up Sarit and see if they could snuff her torch. Uh, so my thoughts on Tori, since she does end up failing on her shot in the dark and going out. She was another player that was never going to win, but she was so messy that it made things very interesting, especially when she won 2 immunities to keep her around when she was likely the easy vote out. It helped make the first 2 episodes of The Merge a lot more dynamic. My review for this episode: this was a great episode of Survivor because it truly got back to what Survivor is meant to be, a social experiment. the game show elements actually got in the way of that and had to be thrown out in favor of it, which hopefully Jeff and CBS will learn from this, that they need to stop gamifying the show, because it already does things. What it does well is the social aspects, and the gamey aspects of it tend to get in the way of that. The two boots we got from it were kind of inconsequential, but the path to them being voted out was what made it so interesting. Because I don't think either Tori or Roxroy were ever going to win this, so it doesn't really matter that they were voted out. Uh, but it made for an interesting episode showing how they got to being voted out. And them being voted out could shape things pretty differently in the coming episodes. So for this episode, I give it a 9 out of 10. My predictions going forward, I think this episode both changes some players' games immensely and solidifies others' positions. Firstly, I think Jonathan's game was completely tanked from this episode. Both Chanel and Roxroy seen what he said at the tribal council to Drea, so they won't reward him for that. And we also heard from both Lindsay and Marianne how hard he is to work with. I still think Mike has a good chance at winning, though he isn't my number one pick now. I do think his spot kind of got hurt in this episode. Lindsay, I think, is still a bit of a long shot, but she might just have an under-edited winner journey, similar to Erica in last season. Both Drea and Marianne could go on a warpath now, possibly working together. Romeo, I don't see winning, but he could from this point slip through to the end while bigger targets are taken out. I actually really like how High has been playing, but I don't think he'll win. He might be sort of like the final boss, or the big villain of the season. Which leaves me with Omer being back on top for me. He's been behind two of the votes since the merge so far, and he nearly got out Romeo last week. And also, thanks to him getting Roxroy voted out in this episode, it led to Tori being voted out. So that's all I got for this one. It was a good episode. I really enjoyed watching it. Stay tuned for next week where we cover episode 10. So hit like and subscribe if you want to catch that.